The park was quiet in the way that makes small sounds feel loud, wind through pine needles, gravel crunching under boots, a warning sign rattling against its post. The ranger stood at the trail entrance with his arms crossed, chin lifted, sunglasses reflecting the empty path behind him. He enjoyed this hour of the morning, when tourists were scarce and authority felt absolute. Then a man approached. No rush, no hesitation. Just steady footsteps and a calm presence that didn't ask permission from the space around him. The ranger straightened. Trails closed, he barked, stepping forward as if the words themselves were a barrier. The man stopped a few feet away. Jeans, old jacket, no backpack, no phone in hand. His face was relaxed, unreadable. "I'm aware," the man said quietly. "I need to pass through." The ranger scoffed. He'd heard every excuse. Photographers, hikers, special permission. This one didn't even try to sound important. "You don't get it," the ranger said, voice rising just enough for nearby visitors to hear. "This area is restricted. Turn around." The man didn't move. That was the first mistake. People were watching now. A couple near the parking lot slowed. Someone stopped tying their shoe. The ranger felt eyes on him, and with them, the familiar itch to assert control. "I said move." The ranger snapped, stepping closer, close enough to intimidate, close enough to smell pine and dust on the man's jacket. Still nothing. No fear. No anger. Just calm. The ranger laughed, sharp and mocking. "What? You think you're special?" The man met his eyes for the first time. His gaze wasn't challenging. It was patient, almost disappointed. "I don't want trouble," the man said. That should have been the end of it, but the ranger mistook restraint for weakness. He shoved the man's chest. The shove did nothing. A flicker of irritation crossed the ranger's face. His jaw tightened. He felt small, and he hated it. "Last warning," he said loudly, turning his body sideways, planting his foot. The man didn't brace, didn't flinch, didn't step back, and that's when the ranger made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. He lifted his leg, a fast, ugly motion. A kick aimed straight at the man's face. The crowd inhaled, and in the next instant, everything changed. The kick never landed. At least, not the way the ranger expected. In the split second his boot left the ground, the calm man finally moved. Not fast, not slow, but precise. A slight turn of the shoulders. A shift of weight so subtle most people missed it. The ranger's leg cut through empty air. What followed didn't look like a fight. It looked like gravity suddenly changed its mind. The man's forearm snapped upward, catching the ranger's knee at an angle that stole all balance. At the same time, a hand wrapped around the ranger's ankle. Not gripping, just guiding, redirecting. The ranger's momentum did the rest. He slammed onto the gravel hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. A sharp, involuntary sound escaped his throat as pain exploded up his leg and into his lower back. Before anyone could react, the man was already kneeling beside him. Not on him. Beside him. One hand pinned the ranger's wrist against the ground. The other pressed lightly against the side of his neck, not choking, not striking, just enough pressure to make a point unmistakably clear. "Don't move," the man said quietly. It wasn't a threat. It was information. The ranger tried to pull free. His arm refused to cooperate. Pain flared, sharp and controlled, like a warning shot sent straight to the nerves. His training screamed at him to fight back, but his body ignored the command. Around them, the park had gone silent. Someone had dropped a water bottle. A phone hit the ground and kept recording. A woman whispered, "Oh my God." The ranger's sunglasses had flown off. His eyes darted wildly now, confusion replacing arrogance. He had kicked people before, drunks, trespassers, loudmouths who backed down once authority raised its voice. This was different. This man hadn't raised his voice at all. "You just assaulted an officer," the ranger gasped, trying to sound in control while failing to breathe properly. The man leaned slightly closer. "You kicked first," he said, in front of witnesses. The ranger froze because he knew it was true. The pressure on his wrist increased. Just a fraction, and pain shot through his arm, clean and surgical. The message was clear. I could end this. I'm choosing not to. Footsteps pounded toward them. 2 more rangers burst from the ranger station, hands hovering near their radios. They stopped short when they saw the scene. Their colleague on the ground, immobilized, the quiet stranger kneeling calmly beside him. "Sir," one of them shouted. "Step away now." The man slowly raised his free hand, palm open, never taking his eyes off the ranger beneath him. "He attacked me," the man said evenly. "I defended myself. He's not injured if he stays still." The ranger on the ground swallowed hard. "Tell them," the man murmured to him. The ranger hesitated, then nodded. I kicked him," he admitted, voice cracking. "He didn't hit me." The other rangers exchanged looks. That wasn't in the script. One of them knelt, checking the ranger's leg. No break, no dislocation, just pain and pride in equal measure. "Let him go," the ranger said quietly. The man released the hold and stood, brushing dust from his knee like he'd simply tied a shoelace. That's when someone in the small crowd spoke up. "Wait," an older man said, squinting. "I know that face." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The man took a step back toward the trail entrance, hands relaxed at his sides, posture loose but alert. He looked completely uninterested in the attention. One ranger frowned, studying him now, the stance, the stillness, the way he carried himself. "Sir," the ranger said slowly, lowering his radio. "What's your name?" The man paused. For the first time, he seemed tired. "Stephen," he said. "Stephen Seagal." The name hit the air like a dropped plate, silence first, then disbelief. "No way, that's not. Is it really him?" The ranger on the ground went pale. Supervisor's vehicle screeched into the parking lot moments later, lights flashing, radios crackling with urgency. The calm of the park shattered under protocol and paperwork. Stephen watched it all with quiet detachment. "I came here for a walk," he said to no one in particular. "Looks like that won't be happening today." He turned toward the trees. Behind him, the ranger who'd kicked him sat shaking on the gravel, realizing something far worse than pain. He hadn't just lost a fight. He had lost control, in front of everyone. And the consequences were just beginning. The flashing lights felt obscene against the quiet trees. Red and blue strobed across bark and stone, turning the parking lot into something unnatural. A place where rules had suddenly arrived louder than nature ever allowed. Supervisors stepped out of their vehicles fast. Not running, but urgent, clipboards, radios, faces already set to containment mode. They took one look at the ranger sitting on the gravel, uniform dusty, leg bent awkwardly, hands trembling, and then at the calm man standing a few steps away. The contrast was impossible to miss. Who initiated contact? The lead supervisor asked. No one answered immediately. The ranger swallowed, his throat dry, his mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I did," he said quietly. That admission hit harder than any punch. The supervisor's pen paused mid-air. "Explain." "I ordered him to leave." "He didn't." I escalated." His voice cracked on the last word. The crowd leaned in. Phones were everywhere now. No one said anything, but the judgment was loud. The supervisor turned to Stephen. "Sir, are you injured?" Stephen shook his head. "Numbered." "Did you restrain him?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Long enough for him to stop moving." The supervisor nodded slowly. This wasn't a man bragging. It was someone stating facts. Zone of the younger rangers shifted uncomfortably. They all knew the policies: use of force, de-escalation, proportional response. This incident checked none of the wrong boxes except one: pride. The supervisor crouched in front of the fallen ranger. "You understand this will require a formal report." The ranger nodded, staring at the dirt. "Yes, sir." "And a suspension pending investigation." The nod came again. Smaller this time. A medic arrived and examined the leg, bruising, swelling. Nothing permanent. The ranger flinched anyway. Every touch a reminder that strength had left him the moment arrogance took over. Stephen stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, invisible again. A senior official approached him, lowering his voice. "Sir, we weren't informed you'd be visiting today." Stephen gave a faint smile. "That's usually how I prefer it." The official exhaled slowly. We'll escort you out if you'd like. Stephen glanced toward the trail, still closed, still quiet. No need. I think the walk can wait. That was mercy. The ranger on the ground looked up at him then. For the first time since the kick, his eyes were clear enough to truly see the man he'd attacked. Not a celebrity. Not a threat. Just someone who had been tested and responded with restraint. I'm sorry, the ranger said suddenly, voice breaking through the hum of radios and whispers. I shouldn't have. Stephen stopped him with a raised hand. This isn't about me, he said calmly. It's about what you do when you think no one can stop you. The words landed heavier than punishment. The supervisor straightened. Officer Brooks, you're relieved of duty for the remainder of the day. Turn in your radio. Brooks unclipped it with shaking fingers. As he stood, his knees buckled slightly, not from injury but from the sudden absence of authority. The badge that had made him loud felt unbearably small now. He was escorted toward a vehicle, eyes fixed ahead, unable to look at the crowd. Stephen turned to leave. Someone called out, Mr. Seagal. He paused. Why didn't you hurt him? A woman asked. You could have. Stephen considered the question for a moment. Because violence is easy, he said. Control is hard. He walked away then, slow, unremarkable, disappearing back into the trees like he'd never been there at all. Behind him, paperwork began. Statements were taken, videos uploaded. An incident that would follow one man for the rest of his career settled into official language: use of force violation, failure to de-escalate. Conduct unbecoming. Brooks sat alone in the back of the vehicle, staring at his hands. They were the same hands. But they felt different now, because power once lost in front of witnesses doesn't come back the same. And he knew, long before the report was finished, that this moment would define him far longer than the uniform ever had. The park returned to its normal rhythm by late afternoon. Tour buses rolled in. Children argued over snacks. Wind moved through the trees like nothing had happened. To anyone arriving fresh, it was just another day, another trail, another ranger station, another rule posted on a wooden sign. But for the people who were there that morning, the air still felt different. Videos spread fast, not the dramatic kind. No music, no filters. Just shaky footage of a uniformed ranger kicking first and ending up on the ground. Then the stillness, the restraint. The moment authority collapsed under its own weight. By nightfall, the clips had millions of views. Headlines didn't scream. They didn't need to. Park ranger suspended after altercation with visitor use. A force investigation launched at state park. Witnesses question ranger conduct. Steven Seagal's name appeared only briefly. Mentioned, then set aside. The story wasn't about who he was. It was about what had been done. An internal investigation followed quickly. Statements were cross-checked. Body cam footage reviewed. Training manuals pulled from shelves. The conclusion was unavoidable. Officer Brooks had violated protocol. Not in panic, not in fear, but in ego. The suspension became termination within weeks. There was no dramatic firing, no shouting. Just a quiet meeting in a small office where the walls were covered in photos of trails he woodingers once protected. You're not being dismissed for the kick, the director said evenly. You're being dismissed for what came before it. Brooks nodded. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Without the uniform, life moved slower and louder in uncomfortable ways. People recognized him now. Not everywhere, but enough. Enough to feel watched, enough to feel remembered. He avoided mirrors. The kick replayed in his head at night. Not the moment of contact, but the instant before, the choice. The second where he could have stepped back, and didn't. That haunted him more than the fall. Stephen, meanwhile, never commented publicly. He declined interviews, ignored requests. Let the story pass without his fingerprints on it. When asked later by a friend why, he answered simply, lessons don't need a spokesperson. Months later, a new ranger stood at the same trail entrance. Younger, quieter, polite to everyone. Even the ones who argued, especially the ones who argued. A small plaque appeared inside the station, unnoticed by most visitors. De-escalation is not weakness. It is discipline. It wasn't flashy, but it was deliberate. One morning, an older man in a worn jacket approached the gate. "Trail closed?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the ranger replied, "but I can explain why if you'd like." The man smiled faintly. "That won't be necessary." He turned and walked away. No one recognized him this time. And that was the point. Because the real ending wasn't about a celebrity, or a fall, or a punishment. It was about the quiet shift that followed. About how authority learned, the hard way, that respect isn't enforced through fear. It's earned through restraint. Somewhere else, Brooks started over. Different job. No uniform. No power. Just long days and quiet nights. And sometimes when someone disrespected him, cut in line, raised their voice, tried to dominate, he remembered the calm man who didn't strike back. And he stepped aside, not out of fear, but understanding. Time has a way of sanding down sharp moments. What once felt like a rupture in the world slowly became a story. People told less often, then only when reminded. New incidents replaced old ones. New outrage eclipsed the last. The algorithm moved on. But some moments don't disappear. They change shape. For Brooks, mornings were the hardest. He woke early out of habit, his body still trained to a schedule that no longer existed. The uniform was gone, folded once, then boxed, then pushed to the back of a closet he rarely opened. He worked at a hardware store now, nothing glamorous. Nothing powerful, just aisles, inventory, and customers who didn't care who he used to be at first. That stung. Later, it became relief. No one expected authority from him anymore. They just expected help. And slowly, he learned the difference. There was a moment one afternoon, months after the incident, when a customer shouted at him over a return policy. The words were sharp, accusatory, familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. Old instincts rose. The urge to correct, to dominate, to win. Instead, he breathed. "I understand," he said, surprising himself. "Let's figure it out." The man deflated almost immediately. Brooks stood there afterward, shaken, not by anger, but by how easy restraint had been. That night, he slept better than he had in months. Across the state, at a different park, a ranger training session ended early. The instructor stood in front of a room of recruits. Young, eager, convinced strength came from command, presence, and volume. He played a short video, no commentary, no edits. Just a man kicking first, and losing everything that mattered. When the screen went dark, the instructor spoke quietly. "This isn't about fighting," he said. "It's about choice." Some recruits shifted uncomfortably. Good. Weeks later, one of them would remember the discomfort when a situation tested them, and they would pause instead of push. Stephen never knew about that training. He never needed to. He'd return to his life, quiet projects, long walks, moments of solitude where fame didn't follow. Occasionally someone recognized him, asked about the park incident. He always answered the same way. It wasn't important, and he meant it. Because what mattered had already happened, in the silence after restraint, in the absence of retaliation. One evening, Stephen stood at the edge of a different trail. No signs, no rangers nearby, just trees and fading light. A young man approached, nervous, clearly recognizing him. "Sir," he said, hesitant, "can I ask you something?" Stephen nodded. "How did you stay calm?" the man asked, "when he attacked you?" Stephen thought for a moment. "Because anger gives away control," he said, "and I don't like losing things I value." The man nodded slowly, as if storing the answer somewhere important. Then he thanked him and walked away. Years later, Brooks returned to that original park, not officially, not in uniform. Just a visitor. He stood at the trail entrance for a long time, watching people come and go, watching the new ranger explain closures patiently. Even to those who argued, Brooks smiled faintly. He didn't go inside the station. He didn't need to. As he turned to leave, he noticed the small plaque on the wall, worn now, scratched slightly by time. De-escalation is not weakness, it is discipline. He stood there longer than necessary. Then he left, not lighter, but steadier. Because the final truth of that day had nothing to do with a kick, or a fall, or a famous name. It was about what happens when power meets ego, and what happens when it doesn't. Some lessons shout, the important ones whisper, and if you're lucky, or humble, they stay with you long after the moment has passed. Years passed, not dramatically, not in chapters marked by headlines or anniversaries, just the ordinary passage of days stacking into seasons, then into something that felt like distance. The park changed. New signs were installed. Trails rerouted, policies updated and reprinted in binders. No one read unless something went wrong. Staff rotated. Names on lockers disappeared and reappeared. But one thing remained consistent, the tone. Visitors noticed it before they understood it. Rangers spoke calmly. Disagreements rarely escalated. Even when people were wrong, they were corrected with patience instead of volume. There were no memos crediting the change to a single incident. There didn't need to be. Stories travel without paperwork. A new ranger, only months into the job, once asked a senior colleague why everyone handled confrontation the same way. The older ranger shrugged. Because we've seen what happens when we don't. That was enough. Brooks built a different life, not a better one, a truer one. He stayed at the hardware store longer than expected. Eventually became a supervisor. Not because he demanded it, but because people trusted him. He listened. He didn't raise his voice. On his first day managing others, someone asked how he wanted things run. Brooks thought carefully before answering. Fair, he said. And calm. The word calm surprised him. He carried it like a rule. Every now and then someone would recognize him. The incident never fully disappeared. It lived in corners of the internet, resurfacing when algorithms got bored. When asked about it, Brooks never defended himself. I was wrong, he said. That's the whole story. Some people respected that. Some didn't. But he slept at night either way. Stephen grew older the way some men do, quietly, deliberately, without chasing relevance. He taught occasionally, wrote privately, walked often. He never returned to that park, not out of avoidance, out of completion. One afternoon, while teaching a small group, a student asked him what the most important lesson of self-defense was. Stephen didn't answer immediately. It's knowing when not to use it, he said finally. Anything else is just ego-wearing technique. The student nodded, though he probably wouldn't understand the weight of that answer until much later. That was fine. The plaque inside the ranger station eventually faded. Sunlight washed the paint thin, a few letters chipped. Maintenance debated replacing it. They didn't wear, gave it credibility. Years later, a child watched a ranger calmly de-escalate an angry visitor. Why didn't you yell at him? The child asked. The ranger smiled. Because yelling doesn't make people listen. The child considered that, and maybe, just maybe carried it forward. That's how legacy actually works. Not through stories retold perfectly, not through names remembered clearly, but through behavior quietly copied. Somewhere along the line, the incident stopped being the day a ranger kicked a man. It became the day restraint won, and no one involved ever truly owned that victory, which made it real. Brooks, now older, sometimes walked trails near his home. Not as a ranger, just as a man moving through the world. When people argued nearby, he noticed his body stay relaxed. When authority tempted him, he felt no pull. He had already learned the cost. Stephen once said to a friend, years after everything, the moment only mattered because people were watching. His friend asked, what if they hadn't been? Stephen smiled. Then it would have mattered even more. Most people never face a moment like that. No cameras. No witnesses holding their breath. No instant where a single choice redraws the line between who they were and who they become. Instead, the test arrives quietly. It shows up in small, forgettable places. A line at a store, a disagreement at work, a stranger who speaks with less respect than they should. No uniform, no fame, no dramatic stakes. Just ego knocking softly. That's where the real story continues. Because the truth is, Brooks didn't fail when he kicked. He failed long before that. In the moments where he confused control with worth. And Stephen didn't, when he restrained him. He won when he chose not to need the win at all. That distinction matters more than people like to admit. Years after the incident faded from public memory, its shape still appeared in ordinary lives, in choices people didn't even realize were connected. A manager paused before humiliating an employee. A teacher lowered their voice instead of raising it. A stranger chose patience when disrespect would have justified anger. None of them thought of a park. None of them thought of a ranger. But the lesson had traveled anyway. That's how real influence works. Not loud, not credited, just absorbed. Power tests everyone eventually. Not with force, but with opportunity. The opportunity to assert dominance, to prove superiority, to make someone smaller so we can feel bigger. And every time the same question appears, unspoken but unmistakable. Who are you when you don't have to be kind? Brooks learned it the hard way. Stephen already knew. But knowing isn't the same as practicing, and practicing restraint, day after day, is harder than any physical discipline. It requires watching your own reactions, questioning your impulses, accepting that being right doesn't always mean being justified. That's uncomfortable work. Most people avoid it. That's why moments like that day stand out. Not because of the violence, but because of the refusal to escalate. Because someone chose silence over spectacle. If you're honest, you've felt that moment too. That tightening in your chest when someone disrespects you. That flash of thought, I could put them in their place, and maybe you have, or maybe you didn't. Either way, the moment passed, and left something behind. That's the part that matters. Because strength isn't revealed in grand gestures. It's revealed in restraint that no one applauds. In walking away when winning would feel good. In staying calm when anger would be justified. In choosing dignity when ego begs for release. That's not weakness, that's mastery. Stephen once described true power in a single sentence, spoken quietly and without performance. Anything you control by force controls you back. That truth doesn't belong to him. It belongs to anyone willing to carry it. So the real ending of this story isn't at a park. It isn't in a uniform. It isn't even about the people involved. It's here. In the next moment you're tested. In the next time someone underestimates you, disrespects you, forgets your humanity. What you do then, when no one's watching, is the only part that counts. Because the strongest people in the room don't announce it. They don't prove it. They don't need to. They simply leave situations better than they found them, and walk away unchanged.